The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Special Warfare Training Compound in Coronado, California. Marcus Thompson stepped off the bus, his worn duffel bag slung over his shoulder, taking in the intimidating sight before him. The concrete buildings stretched out like a fortress, and the sound of instructors barking orders echoed across the courtyard. At 22 years old, Marcus didn't look like the typical SEAL candidate. Where most recruits were lean, athletic specimens carved from years of competitive sports, Marcus carried extra weight around his midsection and had the soft appearance of someone who had spent more time behind a desk than in a gym. The other recruits filing off the bus were a collection of college athletes, former Marines, and fitness enthusiasts. They moved with the confident swagger of men who had been told their entire lives that they were physical specimens. Marcus watched them sizing each other up, flexing subtly, making mental notes about who would be their biggest competition. None of them gave him a second glance. "All right, ladies, welcome to your new home," bellowed Senior Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, a man whose weathered face and steely eyes had seen more combat than most of these recruits could imagine. "For the next 6 months, this place will break you down and hopefully build something useful from the pieces. Most of you won't make it past the first week." The group was herded into a processing building where they filled out endless paperwork, received gear, and underwent medical examinations. Marcus found himself standing next to Jake Morrison, a former college football star from Texas whose biceps strained against his t-shirt. Jake looked Marcus up and down with barely concealed disdain. "No offense, man, but are you sure you're in the right place?" Jake asked, his voice carrying the easy confidence of someone who had never been told he couldn't do something. "This isn't exactly a desk job." Marcus had heard variations of this question his entire life. In high school, coaches had overlooked him for sports teams. In college, classmates had assumed he was majoring in computer science rather than physical education. Even his own family had expressed surprise when he announced his intention to join the Navy, let alone attempt to become a SEAL. "I'm exactly where I need to be," Marcus replied quietly, continuing to fill out his forms. The truth was, Marcus had always been different. Growing up in rural Montana, he had worked on his grandfather's ranch from the time he could walk. While other kids were playing video games, Marcus was hauling hay bales, fixing fences, and wrestling cattle. His grandfather, a Korean War veteran, had taught him that true strength wasn't always visible from the outside. "Boy, the strongest oak in the forest doesn't always look like much when it's young," his grandfather used to say. "But when the storms come, you'll see what's really made of solid wood and what's just for show." As the day progressed, the recruits were subjected to initial fitness assessments. The instructors wanted baseline measurements for everything, from running times to maximum push-ups. When they reached the weight room for strength testing, Marcus felt the familiar knot in his stomach that came with being judged solely on appearance. The bench press station was set up in the center of the room, with recruits taking turns while others watched and offered commentary. The weight started light for warm-ups, with most men easily handling 185 pounds. As the weight increased, the group began to thin out. Some recruits maxed out around 225 pounds. Others pushed through to 275 or 300 pounds. Jake Morrison, true to his football background, managed an impressive 325 pounds to the cheers of his new admirers. "All right, who's next?" called out Instructor Petty Officer Williams, scanning the remaining group. His eyes fell on Marcus, who had been quietly stretching in the corner. "Thompson, you're up." A few snickers rippled through the group. Marcus approached the bench as someone loaded 185 pounds for what everyone assumed would be his maximum attempt. He lay back on the bench, positioned his hands on the bar, and pressed the weight easily for 5 repetitions. "Add some weight," he said simply. The room grew slightly quieter as someone added plates to bring the total to 225 pounds. Marcus pressed it for 5 repetitions without visible strain. The conversations around the room began to fade as more attention focused on the bench press station. "Keep going," Marcus said, sitting up and rolling his shoulders. At 275 pounds, Marcus completed 3 clean repetitions. The room was now completely silent except for the sound of weight plates being loaded onto the bar. At 315 pounds, he managed 2 repetitions, his form remaining perfect throughout. "That's good, Thompson," Instructor Williams said, clearly surprised. "You can call it there." "I'm not done," Marcus replied, lying back down on the bench. The bar was loaded to 365 pounds, more than most men in the room had ever attempted to lift. Marcus took a deep breath, unracked the weight, and slowly lowered it to his chest. The room held its collective breath as he paused, then drove the weight upward in a smooth, controlled motion. The bar moved steadily until his arms locked out completely. "Spot me for another 20 pounds, Marcus said calmly. Instructor Williams and another staff member exchanged glances. This wasn't part of the normal assessment protocol, but curiosity had overtaken procedure. They loaded the bar to 385 pounds. Again, Marcus completed the lift with textbook form. The weight moved slowly but steadily, his face showing concentration but not the desperate strain that would indicate he was at his limit. 20 more, he requested. At 405 pounds, the lift took longer, but Marcus completed it successfully. The room was now filled with an electric tension as everyone realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. 15 more pounds, Marcus said, his voice still steady and calm. The bar was loaded to 420 pounds. This time, when Marcus unracked the weight, there was a slight tremor in his arms as he held it above his chest. He lowered the bar slowly, paused, and then began the ascent. Halfway up, the bar seemed to stick, but Marcus continued applying pressure until it moved again, finally locking out at the top. 10 more, he said. At 430 pounds, the lift was a battle. The bar moved in inches, Marcus's face reddening with effort, but his form remained perfect. When he finally locked out the weight, several recruits actually applauded. "I think I've got 20 more pounds in me," Marcus announced, sitting up on the bench. The instructors were now completely invested in seeing how far this unexpected display would go. The bar was loaded to 450 pounds, a weight that would challenge even elite powerlifters. Marcus lay back down, his hands gripping the bar with quiet determination. The unrack took significant effort, and when he lowered the weight to his chest, it seemed to settle there like a lead blanket. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, inexorably, the bar began to rise. The ascent took nearly 10 seconds, with the bar moving in tiny increments. Marcus's entire body was engaged, his legs driving into the floor, his core tight, his arms and chest working in perfect coordination. When the bar finally locked out, the silence in the room was deafening. Marcus sat up, his breathing slightly elevated but not labored, and looked around at the stunned faces surrounding him. Jake Morrison, who had been so confident about his own 325-pound lift just minutes earlier, was staring with his mouth slightly open. 450 pounds, Instructor Williams announced unnecessarily, as if saying it out loud would help him believe what he had just witnessed. "My grandfather always said that appearances can be deceiving," Marcus said quietly, standing up from the bench. "He taught me that real strength comes from years of consistent work, not from looking the part." As the group moved on to the next assessment station, the dynamic had completely shifted. The recruits who had dismissed Marcus earlier were now looking at him with a mixture of respect and curiosity. The instructors were making notes on their clipboards and exchanging meaningful glances. Marcus had spent his entire life being underestimated, and he had learned to use that to his advantage. While others focused on looking strong, he had focused on becoming strong. While others trained for appearance, he had trained for performance. The 450-pound bench press was just the beginning of what he was capable of, but it had served its purpose. Word of the bench press incident spread quickly through the training compound. By evening chow, Marcus found himself approached by recruits who had previously ignored him. They asked about his training background, his nutrition plan, and his workout routine. He answered their questions politely but without elaborate detail. "Most of my training was just farm work," he explained to a group gathered around his table. "Lifting hay bales, moving equipment, wrestling livestock. My grandfather always said that functional strength beats gym strength every time." That night, as Marcus lay in his rack in the barracks, he could hear whispered conversations about the day's events. Some recruits were revising their initial assessments of their competition. Others were questioning their own preparation for the challenges ahead. Marcus knew that the bench press was just one small test among hundreds that would come over the next 6 months. He knew that raw strength would only take him so far in SEAL training. But he also knew that he had sent a clear message: never judge a book by its cover. The weeks following the bench press incident brought a relentless barrage of physical and mental challenges that pushed every recruit to their breaking point. Hell Week loomed ahead like a dark storm on the horizon, but before they could reach that infamous milestone, they had to survive the daily grind of basic underwater demolition/SEAL training. Marcus had settled into a rhythm that surprised even the instructors. While other recruits struggled with the constant physical demands, He seemed to have an endless reservoir of stamina and determination. During the 4-mile runs on the beach, he consistently finished in the top 5 despite his unconventional build. In the pool, where many recruits panicked during the lengthy underwater swims, Marcus moved with the calm efficiency of someone who had spent summers diving for crawfish in Montana's alpine lakes. The obstacle course became another venue where Marcus's hidden abilities shone through. The course was designed to test not just physical strength, but problem-solving ability under pressure. While other recruits attacked each obstacle with brute force, Marcus approached them with methodical precision. Thompson's got something different about him, Senior Chief Rodriguez observed to his fellow instructors during a morning briefing. He's not the fastest or the prettiest, but he never quits, and he never wastes energy. Watch him on the rope climb. He uses technique while everyone else just muscles through it. The instructors had developed a grudging respect for Marcus, but they weren't about to make training easier for him. If anything, they pushed him harder, curious to find his breaking point. During one particularly brutal session of surf torture where recruits were forced to lie in the freezing Pacific Ocean while waves crashed over them, Marcus displayed an almost supernatural ability to endure cold and discomfort. "How are you not hypothermic right now?" gasped Tommy Rodriguez, a recruit from Florida who was shivering uncontrollably beside him in the surf. The water temperature was a bone-chilling 58 degrees, and they had been lying in it for over an hour. "Montana winters," Marcus replied through chattering teeth. "My grandfather used to make me help him break ice on the stock ponds when it was 20 below zero. This is actually kind of refreshing." But it wasn't just physical toughness that set Marcus apart. During classroom sessions on tactics and strategy, he demonstrated an intuitive understanding of military concepts that impressed even veteran instructors. His farm background had taught him to think systematically about problems, to consider multiple variables simultaneously, and to remain calm under pressure. "Thompson!" called out Lieutenant Commander Hayes during a navigation exercise. "Your team is pinned down by enemy fire in an urban environment. You have limited ammunition, no radio contact, and 3 wounded teammates. What's your next move?" Marcus studied the tactical map for a moment, considering the various factors. "Sir, I'd look for the nearest storm drain or sewer system. In rural areas, we sometimes use irrigation ditches to move livestock without being seen. Urban environments have similar hidden pathways. I'd move the wounded to covered positions, use one able-bodied teammate as rear security, and personally conduct a reconnaissance of underground routes that might allow us to either evacuate the wounded or find a position where we can call for support." The lieutenant commander nodded approvingly. Unconventional thinking, but tactically sound. "Thompson, you're beginning to understand that SEALs succeed not because we're superhuman, but because we think differently than our enemies expect." As training intensified, the initial class of 180 recruits began to shrink dramatically. Some quit during the brutal physical training sessions. Others were dropped for medical reasons after injuries. A few were dismissed for failing to meet academic standards. By the 8th week, fewer than 100 recruits remained. Jake Morrison, the former football star who had initially dismissed Marcus, found himself struggling more than he had ever anticipated. His impressive physique, built for short bursts of explosive power, was not well suited to the relentless endurance demands of SEAL training. During one particularly challenging swim session, Jake began to panic underwater and had to be pulled to safety by instructors. "I don't understand it, man," Jake confided to Marcus after a grueling day that had claimed 3 more recruits. "I was an all-conference linebacker. I bench-pressed over 300 pounds. How come you're handling this stuff better than me?" Marcus was cleaning his gear methodically, a habit he had learned from his grandfather, who maintained that equipment care was a reflection of mental discipline. "Different kinds of strength, I guess," he replied. "Football strength is about explosive power for a few seconds at a time. This is more like marathon strength. It's about being able to keep going when everything in your body is telling you to quit." "But how did you develop that kind of endurance growing up on a farm?" Jake pressed. Marcus paused in his gear maintenance, remembering the countless hours he had spent working alongside his grandfather. When you're responsible for keeping animals alive through brutal winters, you learn that quitting isn't an option. Cows don't care if you're tired or cold or hurt. They need food and water every day, no matter what. When you're 14 years old and it's your job to break ice on water troughs when it's negative 30 degrees outside, you develop a certain mental toughness. "My grandfather used to tell me stories about Korea," Marcus continued. "He said the soldiers who survived weren't necessarily the biggest or strongest ones. They were the ones who could endure discomfort without letting it affect their decision-making. He called it Comfortable being uncomfortable. Jake listened intently, beginning to understand that his approach to training had been fundamentally flawed. He had been trying to overpower the challenges instead of adapting to them. The instructors had been watching this conversation from across the barracks, and Senior Chief Rodriguez approached the two recruits. "Morrison, Thompson, front and center," he barked. Both men snapped to attention. "Yes, Senior Chief," they responded in unison. "Morrison, you've been struggling lately," Rodriguez said bluntly. "Your quit rate is borderline, and your attitude needs adjustment. Thompson, you're going to be Morrison's swim buddy for the next phase of training. Your job is to help him understand what it means to never leave a teammate behind." The swim buddy system was a cornerstone of SEAL training. Recruits were paired together and made responsible for each other's success or failure. If one quit, both were often dismissed from the program. It was designed to build the kind of unbreakable bonds that would be essential in combat situations. Marcus accepted the assignment without complaint, but Jake looked stricken. Being assigned a swim buddy often meant that instructors had identified you as someone likely to quit. It was both a lifeline and a warning. "Don't look so worried," Marcus told Jake as they prepared for the next day's training. "We're going to get through this together." Over the following weeks, Marcus became not just Jake's swim buddy, but his mentor. He taught him breathing techniques for managing panic during underwater exercises. He showed him how to pace himself during long runs to avoid the boom and bust energy cycles that had been sabotaging Jake's performance. Most importantly, he shared the mental strategies he had learned from years of agricultural work. "When we're doing surf torture tomorrow," Marcus explained, as they lay in their racks the night before another brutal session, "don't think about the full hour we'll be in the water. Break it down into 5-minute segments. Tell yourself you can endure anything for 5 minutes. When those 5 minutes are up, commit to 5 more. Before you know it, the hour is over." Jake was skeptical. "That sounds too simple to work." "Simple doesn't mean easy," Marcus replied. "But simple techniques are the ones that work when your brain is too cold or tired to think clearly." The next morning's surf torture session proved Marcus's point. While other recruits struggled with the psychological weight of knowing they would be in freezing water for an extended period, Jake used Marcus's technique to break the experience into manageable chunks. For the first time since training began, he completed the exercise without requiring instructor intervention. As Hell Week approached, the remaining recruits could feel the anticipation building like pressure in a boiler. Everyone knew that Hell Week was where SEAL training separated those who merely wanted to be SEALs from those who would do anything to earn the trident. It was 5.5 days of continuous training, with a maximum of 4 hours of sleep total. Most recruits who were going to quit would do so during Hell Week. "Gentlemen," announced Lieutenant Commander Hayes during a pre-Hell Week briefing, "starting Sunday night you will discover things about yourselves that you never knew existed. Some of you will find reserves of strength and determination that will surprise you. Others will find that their limits are lower than they hoped." Marcus listened to the briefing with the same calm attention he brought to everything else. He had been preparing for Hell Week his entire life, even if he hadn't realized it at the time. Every morning he had dragged himself out of bed at 4 a.m. to help with chores. Every time he had worked through injury or illness to keep the farm running. Every moment he had pushed through discomfort because the job required completion. All of it had been preparation for this week. That Sunday afternoon, as the recruits prepared for the beginning of Hell Week, Marcus found himself thinking about his grandfather's final piece of advice before he had left for the Navy. "Boy," the old man had said, gripping Marcus's shoulder with hands that were still strong despite 8 decades of hard work, "there's going to come a time when everything inside you is screaming to quit. Your body will hurt, your mind will be fuzzy, and quitting will seem like the most reasonable thing in the world. When that moment comes, remember that the person you become is determined by what you do when quitting seems reasonable." As the sun set over the Pacific Ocean and Hell Week officially began with the sound of automatic weapons fire and explosions, Marcus understood that his grandfather's words were about to be put to the ultimate test. Hell Week erupted like a thunderstorm at sunset on Sunday evening. The familiar training compound transformed into a combat zone, as instructors wearing night vision goggles and carrying blank-firing weapons descended on the remaining 87 recruits like avenging spirits. Explosions echoed across the beach as smoke grenades filled the air with choking grey clouds. The psychological warfare had begun. Marcus found himself immediately separated from Jake during the initial chaos, but his swim buddy's training had paid off. Instead of panicking in the confusion, Jake moved with purpose, following the techniques Marcus had taught him about staying calm under pressure. The recruits were herded into the surf for the first of many extended sessions in the freezing Pacific Ocean. "Welcome to Hell Week, gentlemen," Senior Chief Rodriguez's voice boomed through a bullhorn as recruits linked arms in the crashing waves. "For the next 5.5 days, you will be cold, wet, sandy, and sleep-deprived. Some of you are already thinking about quitting. The bell is right there on the beach. Ring it 3 times, and your suffering ends immediately." The brass bell gleamed in the artificial lights set up around the training area. It had become a symbol of surrender, and Marcus could see several recruits already staring at it with longing. He forced himself to look away and focus on the task at hand. The first night was a blur of continuous movement. Boat crews were formed and reformed as instructors eliminated the weakest performers. Marcus found himself assigned to Boat Crew 7. Led by a former Marine named Santiago, who had the kind of natural leadership that emerged under pressure. Their rubber boat became their constant companion as they carried it everywhere, from the beach to the obstacle course to the chow hall. By Tuesday morning, the class had shrunk to 63 recruits. The bell had claimed nearly 24 men in less than 36 hours. Marcus watched each departure with a mixture of sympathy and determination. Every man who quit was someone who had trained for months to reach this point. But when the ultimate test came, they had found their breaking point. "Thompson, you're looking too comfortable," Instructor Williams shouted as Marcus helped carry his boat crew's rubber boat across the beach for what felt like the 100th time. "Drop and give me 50 push-ups. The rest of your crew can wait while you exercise." This was one of the psychological techniques used during Hell Week. Instructors would single out recruits who seemed to be handling the stress well and make their teammates suffer for it. The goal was to create internal pressure within boat crews and test whether recruits would turn on each other under stress. Marcus dropped and began the push-ups without complaint, executing each one with perfect form despite the sand that had accumulated in every piece of his gear. His boat crew members watched him work, but instead of resentment, Marcus saw something else in their faces: respect. "Crew 7, your boat handler is obviously not tired enough," Williams continued. "Since Thompson is feeling so strong, you can all low-crawl to the next station while he carries the boat by himself." Low-crawling through sand while wearing full gear was brutally exhausting, but Marcus hoisted the 200-pound rubber boat onto his shoulders and began walking. The boat crew started their low-crawl beside him, and something remarkable happened. Instead of resentment, the crew began encouraging each other. "Come on, Thompson's carrying our whole boat," Santiago grunted as he crawled through the sand. "Least we can do is keep up with him." By Wednesday afternoon, the hallucinations had begun. Sleep deprivation combined with constant physical stress created a surreal environment where recruits saw things that weren't there and heard voices in the wind. Marcus found himself having conversations with his grandfather, who seemed to be walking beside him during particularly difficult moments. "You're doing fine, boy," the familiar voice said as Marcus struggled to keep his eyes open during a navigation exercise. "This is just like that blizzard when you were 16. Remember? We were out checking cattle when the storm hit, and we couldn't see 10 feet in any direction." Marcus remembered that day vividly. He and his grandfather had been caught in a whiteout blizzard while checking on cattle in the far pasture. They had used fence lines to navigate back to the barn, one hand always touching the wire while they fought through wind and snow that seemed determined to disorient them. "Same principle applies here," his grandfather's voice continued. "Keep one hand on something solid, your training, your purpose, your commitment to your teammates. Don't let the confusion make you lose sight of why you're here." Thursday brought the dreaded steel pier evolution, where boat crews had to work in the harbor while waves crashed over a concrete pier. The water was so cold that several recruits developed hypothermia and had to be pulled from the exercise. Marcus found himself functioning as an unofficial leader, helping to coordinate his crew's movements and keeping everyone focused on the task at hand. "Thompson, how are you still thinking clearly?" asked Rodriguez, one of his crew members who was shivering violently and struggling to perform basic tasks. "I can't even remember my own name right now." "Break everything down into the smallest possible steps," Marcus replied, his own speech slightly slurred from cold and exhaustion. "Don't think about completing the whole evolution. Just focus on the next rope tie, the next equipment check, the next command from the instructors." It was during the steel pier exercise that Marcus truly proved his worth as a potential SEAL. When Rodriguez became so hypothermic that he was in danger of falling into the harbor, Marcus managed to secure him with a safety line, while simultaneously helping to coordinate the crew's response to instructor commands. His combination of physical capability, mental clarity under stress, and leadership instinct was exactly what the instructors were looking for. "That's what we're talking about," Senior Chief Rodriguez observed to Lieutenant Commander Hayes as they watched Marcus help his struggling teammate. "Thompson doesn't just endure the stress, he performs better because of it." Friday morning arrived with the infamous around-the-world paddle, where boat crews had to navigate their rubber boats around a course in the Pacific Ocean while fighting against currents, waves, and their own exhaustion. Many crews became so disoriented that they paddled in circles or ended up miles off course. Marcus's crew had been reduced to 5 members after 2 recruits had quit during the previous night's surf torture session. They were understaffed and exhausted, but Marcus had developed an almost supernatural ability to navigate by instinct. When their compass became unreliable due to water damage, he used the position of the sun, the direction of the swells, and landmarks on shore to keep them on course. "How do you know which way to go?" Santiago asked as they paddled through swells that seemed to tower over their small boat. "Same way I used to find lost cattle in the mountains," Marcus replied, his paddle stroke remaining steady despite 4 days of continuous exertion. "You learn to read the land, the water, the wind. Everything tells you something if you know how to listen." Their crew was the third to complete the paddle, despite being short-handed. As they pulled their boat up onto the beach, Marcus felt a profound sense of accomplishment. They had less than 24 hours of Hell Week remaining. Saturday brought the final push, a series of evolutions designed to test every skill they had developed over the past 5 days. The class was down to 42 recruits, and those who remained had proven they possessed something special. But the instructors weren't done testing them. The final evolution was a simulated combat mission, where boat crews had to infiltrate a beach, complete an objective, and extract under enemy fire. Everything they had learned about teamwork, leadership, and performance under pressure would be evaluated one last time. Marcus found himself naturally taking point as his crew moved through the simulated combat zone. His ability to remain calm and think clearly, even while running on less than 4 hours of sleep over 5 days, made him an obvious choice for leadership. When they encountered an obstacle that required both physical strength and technical problem-solving, Marcus demonstrated the same combination of power and precision that had surprised everyone during that first bench press assessment. "Thompson, take your crew and secure the high ground, while Boat Crew 3 provides covering fire," commanded one of the instructor role players. Marcus led his team up a steep embankment, using hand signals to communicate while automatic weapons fired blanks around them. When they reached the designated position, he quickly assessed the tactical situation and began directing his teammates' movements with quiet confidence. "Rodriguez, you and Martinez set up security to the north. Santiago, help me get this equipment in position. We need to be ready to provide covering fire for the other crew's extraction." As the simulation concluded and the final shots echoed across the training area, Marcus felt a profound sense of transformation. The man who had stepped off the bus 6 months ago, carrying extra weight and enduring skeptical looks from fellow recruits, had become something entirely different. He had proven to himself and everyone around him that true strength came from character, not appearance. Sunday morning arrived with the traditional end of Hell Week celebration. The 42 surviving recruits stood on the beach in formation, exhausted but victorious. They had endured one of the most challenging training experiences in the world, and each of them had discovered reserves of strength and determination they hadn't known they possessed. "Gentlemen," announced Lieutenant Commander Hayes, "you have completed Hell Week. You are not yet Navy SEALs, but you have proven that you have what it takes to earn that honor. Over the next several months, you will continue training, learning the specialized skills that make SEALs the world's premier special operations force." Marcus looked around at his fellow survivors, men who had become brothers through shared suffering and mutual support. Jake Morrison stood nearby, transformed from the cocky football player who had questioned Marcus's presence into a confident warrior who understood the difference between looking tough and being tough. "Thompson," Senior Chief Rodriguez called out after the formation was dismissed, "good job this week. You showed real leadership potential out there." "Thank you, Senior Chief," Marcus replied. "I had good teachers." "Your grandfather would be proud," Rodriguez said, surprising Marcus with his knowledge of personal details. "We read everyone's background files, son. Not many kids grow up learning the kind of work ethic you demonstrated on that ranch." As Marcus walked across the beach toward the barracks, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. 6 months ago, he had been dismissed as an unlikely candidate for elite military service. Today, he was recognized as one of the most promising recruits in his class. The bench press that had first caught everyone's attention had been just the beginning. It had opened their eyes to the possibility that he might be different than he appeared. But it was everything that followed. The endurance, the leadership, the unshakable determination that had proven his worth. Marcus understood now what his grandfather had meant when he talked about storms revealing what was truly made of solid wood. Hell Week had been that storm, and Marcus had not just survived it, he had thrived in it. The remaining months of SEAL training would bring new challenges, advanced combat techniques, specialized equipment training, and the final tests that would determine who earned the right to wear the Trident insignia. But Marcus knew now that he belonged here. He had found his calling, and more importantly, he had found the warrior who had been waiting inside him all along. The 450-pound bench press had been impressive, but it was what happened after that moment. The consistent excellence, the quiet leadership, the refusal to quit when quitting seemed reasonable, that had truly left the instructors and fellow recruits speechless. Marcus Thompson, the underestimated farm kid from Montana, had become exactly what the Navy SEALs were looking for. A warrior who combined physical capability with mental toughness, individual excellence with team loyalty, and quiet confidence with unshakable determination. The transformation was complete, but the mission was just beginning.